We are now moving into a new area of tort law, and that is nuisance. So what is nuisance? It's a common law tort, and it's characterized by actions that cause offense, annoyance, and trouble to people. So it's basically discomfort to others. That's what nuisance is about. Now, nuisance can be classified as either public nuisance or private nuisance. This slide we'll be talking about public nuisance. So public nuisance is where there is annoyance to the public at large. So it's not only directed at a single individual, but it's targeted towards the public. An example of that would be any actions that cause annoyance to road users, so the general road users, or attendees at a community hall, for instance. That would be considered as part of public nuisance. There needs to be special damage over and above what the general public experiences for an individual to sue uh, in the tort of nuisance. So for public nuisance to sue in that, you have to have experienced something, a damage that is larger than what the average individual in the public had experienced from the action that's causing nuisance. Private nuisance, on the other hand, is violation that is targeted towards an individual. So it's talking about an individual's right to reasonable use of their land. Uh, in Miller and Jackson, so this case that you see highlighted in front of you, there was an unreasonable use by a person of their land to the detriment of the neighbor, and that was considered as a nuisance, private nuisance. So it's mostly related to issues with sound pollution, so people being very noisy and hence impacting their neighbors. Uh, to bring an action, the plaintiff must have an interest in the affected land. So if you were a plaintiff in a particular case that relates to private nuisance, then you must have an interest in the impacted land. So it's usually like a neighbor that lives on a property, they own that property, and they're impacted by the noises that are coming from an adjacent property. The plaintiff also needs to prove that the interference of the defendant caused damage, or that it substantially impacted the enjoyment of the plaintiff for their for the land. So these are the two main aspects. So the interest in the affected land, and the fact that the actions of the defendant that caused damage or substantially impacted the enjoyment of the plaintiff of their land. These are the two aspects that have to be present in order to sue in the tort of nuisance. What's the difference between trespass and nuisance? That's a very important question, and it's important to make sure we're able to distinguish between these two. Even though they're both part of tort law, they're different in the sense that nuisance, you have to prove that there was a damage. So for you to sue in nuisance, you have to prove that a damage had taken place. Remember, in trespass, this was not the case. Nuisance also describes a type of harm that was suffered by the plaintiff, uh, whereas trespass is about the conduct that's forbidden. So trespass in itself is a conduct that's forbidden, whereas nuisance creates a harm, and that harm impacts uh, the individual. Now that individual can be part of the public nuisance, or a private individual, private nuisance. Now, the remedies that are available for nuisance, two types. So in the common law, usually it's either an injunction, so where the court orders that the defendant stops their actions, the actions that are causing nuisance, or the court can award damages to the plaintiff if the nuisance had caused damage to the plaintiff.